President Theodore Roosevelt was known for his love of adventure. In 1910, a year and a half after he left office, he went on one of his most adventurous trips when he became the first president to fly in an airplane. I'm Bob Summers, and this is a presidential story. Near Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, on December 17, 1903, Orville and Wilbur Wright made the first controlled, powered, and sustained, heavier-than-air human flight. That first flight lasted 12 seconds and covered 120 feet. By the end of that day, they were able to travel 852 feet over 59 seconds. Over the next 5 years, the Wrights continued their development of a practical, fixed-wing aircraft and obtained patents in the U.S. and Europe. These patents focused on the controls necessary for stability and turning, and surprisingly, not for the airplane itself. They also started to sign contracts with the U.S. government and others, although they would never show a plane in flight until the signed contract was in hand. The Wright brothers recognized that they needed to get people familiar with the idea of airplanes and to market the aircraft's capabilities, so they arranged demonstrations at air meets. They also needed some pilots, so they established the first civilian flying school in the U.S. In 1908, the Wrights started to demonstrate their airplanes in Europe. Wilbur made over 200 flights over the next year, dazzling the paying crowds wherever he went. Wilbur made headlines in the fall of 1909 with several spectacular flights at New York's Hudson-Fulton celebration, witnessed by more than 1 million New Yorkers. Wilbur made a 20-mile flight up the Hudson River from Governor's Island to Grant's Tomb and back in 33 minutes. Since he was flying over water, he lashed a canoe to the bottom of his airplane in case of an emergency landing. Roosevelt's interest in flight started early. In 1902, famed Brazilian balloonist Alberto Santos Dumont visited the White House to meet the president and suggested Roosevelt join him for a balloon ride. Newspapers across the country generally condemned the idea. The Evening Journal in Wilmington, Delaware, for example, wrote that Roosevelt's life and limbs belonged to the nation quite as much as to him individually, and that it would be an unnecessary jeopardy for him to go sailing around the clouds. Roosevelt never flew while in office, but in April 1910, Roosevelt did see his first flying demonstration while visiting Paris, and he had another opportunity 6 months later. On October 11, 1910, Roosevelt found himself in St. Louis as he was laying the groundwork to run for a third presidential term. On the same day, the Wright brothers and their exhibition team arranged an air meet at Kinloch Field, now known as St. Louis Lambert International Airport. Roosevelt accepted their telegraphed invitation to attend the event. When Roosevelt and his party arrived at the field, they met one of the demonstration pilots, 26-year-old Archibald Hoxsey. Taking advantage of the impromptu meeting, Hoxsey said to Roosevelt, "Colonel, I'd like to have you go up with me." Roosevelt replied, "No, thank you, there are enough high flyers up there already." As Hoxsey recalled, he then told Roosevelt that they celebrated the same birthday, October 27th, which wasn't exactly true. Hoxsey's birthday was actually October 15th. "After I told him that, he smiled," Hoxsey said. "As soon as I saw his smile, I knew I had him." Roosevelt took off his coat and said, "All right, but let's not make too much fuss about it." Roosevelt made his way to Hoxsey's Wright Model B airplane, contorted himself around the wires into the passenger seat, which was more like a wooden platform, and buckled himself in. Actually, there were no seatbelts or harnesses, so Roosevelt just had to hang on. Actually, Hoxsey warned Roosevelt, "Be careful not to pull any of those strings." He was sitting directly underneath the valve cord of the engine, and the engine would have stopped had he touched it, so Roosevelt had to find another way to secure himself. The 26-foot-long Model B had a 39-foot wingspan, weighed 800 pounds empty, and was powered by a single, 4-cylinder, 32-horsepower gasoline engine. With a maximum speed of around 40 miles an hour, the Model B had a range of 110 miles. Approximately 100 Wright Model B airplanes were built between 1910 and 1914. Only 3 still exist today. Roosevelt wasn't really dressed for the occasion. Since he didn't have a hat, he borrowed one from a newspaperman. Apparently, the hat was all he needed. Roosevelt was ready. He said to Hoxsey, "Let her go." The airplane quickly took off and reached an altitude of between 100 and 150 feet. It wasn't until Hoxsey had made their first mile-and-a-half lap around the field that the crowd realized that Roosevelt was defying death on board. As they passed the grandstand, Roosevelt leaned forward and waved his hands to the assembled crowd. The crowd reacted with silence, as they feared for the former president's safety. After some dips and climbs, at the end of the second lap, 3 minutes and 20 seconds into the flight, Hoxsey gently landed the plane and glided over the grass to come to rest a short distance from the grandstand. When the 10,000 spectators saw that Roosevelt had landed safely, they cheered wildly while guards tried to keep the crowds from rushing the field. Roosevelt was beaming as he extricated himself through the network of airplane wires. His first act was to vigorously shake Hoxsey's hand, declaring, "Hoxsey, you're all right. That was the bulliest experience I ever had. I envy you your professional conquest of space." To the assembled reporters, Roosevelt shared his thoughts. "It was great, first class. It was the finest experience I have ever had. I wish I could stay up for an hour, but I haven't the time this afternoon." Hoxsey later recalled, "I was very careful. I said to myself, if anything happens to him, I'll never be able to square myself with the American people. I was mighty glad when we landed. I never felt a greater responsibility in my life." After only 2 years of frequent airplane flights, the nascent technology was inherently dangerous, so Hoxsey had reason to be anxious. 11 weeks after his flight with Roosevelt, Hoxsey broke the world altitude record by soaring to 11,474 feet on December 26th, thereby earning $6,000 in prize money at an international air meet in Los Angeles. 5 days later, on December 31st, 1910, Hoxsey tried to break his own altitude record. He spent an hour and a half soaring over California's 5,710-foot snow-capped Mount Wilson, reaching heights of about 7,000 feet. As the increasing winds became violent, Hoxsey started his descent. The winds started to whip the airplane around. Hoxsey lost control, and he dropped out of the sky. To the horror of those watching below, Hoxsey crashed to the ground and died. The Wright brothers stepped up by paying the funeral costs and giving Hoxsey's widow a $10,000 annuity. Although Roosevelt had not known Hoxsey for long, he had formed a kinship with him. Roosevelt paid tribute, saying, "I am more grieved than I can say over the tragedy. Hoxsey was a man unafraid. Such men as he are the ones who accomplish things in the sphere of science and of all activity." 3 months later, Roosevelt stopped by Mrs. Hoxsey's house in Pasadena, California, during a campaign tour to personally express his condolences. Thanks for watching.